camera shakes as the crowd erupts, screams tearing through the night, cell phones lifted high, recording chaos no one expected. A blur darts across the frame, a figure fleeing into darkness, swallowed by flashing lights and panicked voices. In that instant, the rally transformed from a gathering of words to a battlefield of fear. This wasn't just a man running. It was a movement colliding with the violence meant to silence it. The escape was more than footsteps. It was the echo of a country fractured, of ideals pursued and attacked in equal measure. But the question wasn't just who ran that night. It was why this fleeting image has left America gasping, divided, and bracing for what comes next. The evening began with energy thick in the air. 1,000 voices buzzed under the glare of stage lights, flags waving, chants rising, cameras clicking as though history itself had RSVP'd to this rally. For supporters, it wasn't just a political gathering. It was a promise that their voices mattered, that free speech still had a beating heart in a time of constant silencing. The crowd leaned forward with anticipation, every word from the podium landing like fuel on dry kindling. Optimism pulsed through the scene. For a moment it felt unstoppable. And then, rupture. A crack echoed where there should have been applause. The optimism bled into panic. Shouts twisted into screams. Where there had been light, a shadow surged forward. The figure of a shooter, stepping across the invisible line between argument and violence. What had been a stage for expression was suddenly a stage for survival. The contrast was electric, terrifying, impossible to ignore. Freedom in full bloom, cut short by an attempt to silence it. The platform meant for voices was invaded by the shadow determined to erase them. At the center of the storm stood Charlie Kirk, a man as polarizing as the country he speaks to. To his followers, he is more than a commentator. He is a symbol of defiance, a young leader unafraid to clash with institutions that many feel have ignored them. His rallies are not quiet affairs. They are theaters of energy, places where students and restless citizens gather to hear a message that cuts against the grain. To critics, his voice grates like sandpaper, unapologetic and unyielding. But to his supporters, that friction is precisely the point. Kirk has built himself into a lightning rod of free expression. He provokes because he believes provocation is necessary, and he thrives in the role of outsider pushing against conformity. His words, whether praised or condemned, are never ignored. That night, as cameras pointed toward him, he wasn't just a speaker on a stage. He was a stand-in for a larger struggle, a man daring to articulate a vision many others are too afraid to voice. Love him or loathe him, Charlie Kirk occupied the center of the arena, and when the chaos erupted, it was his presence that defined the stakes. From the blur of chaos emerged the figure that would seize the nation's attention, not through words, but through violence. The suspect was faceless, their identity at first unknown, yet their actions screamed louder than any speech that night. In the grainy footage, they were not a person so much as a silhouette, a shadow darting through the cracks of panic. And in that shadow lived something more ominous than a single individual, the embodiment of political rage no longer confined to debates or comment sections, but spilling, raw and destructive, into the real world. This figure did not arrive with an argument, nor did they leave with one. Their language was disruption, their message written in fear. Where the rally had been a stage for clashing ideas, the suspect tried to rewrite it into a theater of intimidation. The symbolism was impossible to ignore. Here was not merely a fleeing body. It was a symbol of the forces eager to silence rather than to speak, to fracture rather than to build. A shadow fueled by anger, sprinting from accountability, leaving behind not just chaos in the air, but the haunting question of how far political violence is willing to go. One moment. The rally pulsed with rhythm, chants rising, applause rolling like waves, and then, in a heartbeat, everything shattered. A sharp crack split the air, a sound foreign to celebration yet unmistakable. Gasps cut through the night, followed by screams that seemed to ripple outward in shock. People dropped low, hands shielding their heads while others scrambled for exits, hearts pounding, eyes wide with disbelief. The camera phones, still rolling, captured every frame. The blur of bodies pressing together, the frantic shouts for safety, the piercing wail of panic drowning out the speech that had filled the air seconds earlier. Through the chaos, the lens caught the suspect sprinting, vanishing into the dark as quickly as the violence had erupted. In an instant, peace became rupture, optimism became terror. What had been a stage of voices now lay broken, haunted by the echo of a single act that changed everything. No sooner had the smoke of panic cleared than the war of words ignited. What happened on that stage was not just a violent disruption, it was instantly seized as a symbol, a weapon in the battle over America's future. Supporters of Charlie Kirk moved quickly, their voices sharpened by outrage. This was not random. They argued it was an attack on free speech itself. Proof that speaking boldly in public now comes with the risk of being silenced by force. They saw Kirk as a man targeted for daring to say what others would not. His rally turned into a front line where ideas collided with bullets. But critics countered just as fiercely. To them, the chaos wasn't born in a vacuum. It was the inevitable consequence of rhetoric pushed too far, of words sharpened into daggers and hurled recklessly into an already fractured nation. In their view, the suspect wasn't just a villain, but a mirror, reflecting the volatility stoked by constant provocation. Two narratives, clashing with equal intensity, the hero wielding words, the villain unleashing chaos. The stage that had echoed with chants now echoed with questions, each more urgent than the last, each demanding, who is responsible for the fire engulfing us all? In the days that followed, the rally itself became almost secondary to the storm it unleashed. Headlines screamed across screens, anchors framed the story in dueling tones, and every commentator rushed to plant their flag in the widening divide. The footage of the suspect fleeing replayed endlessly, dissected frame by frame, until it no longer felt like evidence but like prophecy, foretelling the battles still to come. On social media, the divide sharpened with every post. Supporters of Charlie Kirk declared the chaos a warning. If one man could be attacked for speaking, then no voice was safe. They rallied around him with renewed intensity, casting him as a symbol of resilience in the face of silencing. Hashtags trended, pledges of solidarity multiplied, his message amplified through the very violence meant to mute it. Opponents, meanwhile, tore into his rhetoric, painting it as the spark that set the tinderbox aflame. To them, the shooting was not an attack on speech but the predictable outcome of dangerous language hurled too freely into a fragile public square. Lines hardened, voices grew sharper, and what began as a single act of violence metastasized into another chapter of polarization. Each side more convinced the other was pushing America to the brink. As the days dragged on, the noise grew deafening. The rally that had once been hailed as a platform for bold speech now seemed buried beneath headlines about violence and fear. Commentators who once dismissed Kirk now circled back with sharper questions, pressing on whether his rhetoric had helped light the fuse. For his supporters, it was a gut punch, watching their message slip beneath a tide of condemnation, watching a moment meant to energize their movement become consumed by images of chaos. The narrative seemed to be slipping away, swallowed by the shadow of the suspect's actions. Doubt crept in, whispers of retreat followed. Perhaps the event would be remembered not for what was said, but for how it ended. Perhaps the shadow had won. The story could have ended here, but then came the turning point. Just when the silence threatened to consume him, Charlie Kirk seized the microphone once more, not with fear, but with fire. In interviews, on stages, across every platform that would broadcast his words, he refused to cede ground. His message was clear, sharp, unflinching. We won't back down. The rally, he declared, had not been broken by violence but reborn through it, proof that free speech was worth defending, even when danger lurked in the crowd. To his followers, this was not damage control. It was defiance incarnate. A leader standing taller when others expected retreat. Kirk reframed the chaos as validation of his mission, turning panic into purpose, casting resilience as the final word in a battle that was far from over. The shaky clip of the suspect fleeing became more than evidence. It became an icon, shared millions of times, dissected on every platform, It burned into the national imagination like a scene from a thriller. Was it cowardice, desperation, or proof of the chaos simmering beneath America's surface? Each replay sparked another round of argument, another surge of outrage, and while the suspect's shadow raced endlessly across screens, Charlie Kirk doubled down, refusing to let fear own the narrative. He stood taller, sharper, turning the image of flight into fuel for his cause. To his followers, it was catharsis. Where the villain ran, the hero remained. The chase had ended, but the larger battle of wills was only beginning.